Good morning, everyone. I would like to begin by acknowledging the Ngunnawal and the Ngambri people and the lands and the waterways on which the National Gallery stands. I'm really thankful that we had Paul here on site with us yesterday, and I'm really buzzing from that amazing welcome and smoking still. The National Gallery has the largest collection of First Nations work in the world, and I pay my respects to those artists and their country, the work in which we are now custodians of. I also pay my respects to my First Nations colleagues and the artists and the communities we get to work with on a daily basis. They generously share their culture with us, and I have the privilege of working with a team that I get to learn from each and every day, which is really amazing. I didn't introduce myself properly yesterday, I don't think. So my name is Leanne Waterhouse and I'm the Education Manager here at the National Gallery. I have the opportunity to work with a really dynamic group of 24 educators. Those educators create amazing programs. You met some of them at the round tables yesterday, and you will meet some more of them in the workshops and hopefully over lunch and as you go through the next 2 days of the conference. Those educators don't work in isolation. They collaborate with our amazing team of conveners. So we have a huge, broader learning team here of youth and access, young people and adult programs, and they are supported by our learning assistants and a whole range of other people. And they deliver some really remarkable workshops and programs for our audiences here on site at the National Gallery in Canberra, but also across the country on all of our touring shows and internationally, as well as all of our online programs. And if you haven't engaged with our online programs, please take the opportunity. You'll see over lunch all the QR codes that come up. I just have a little bit of announcements to make before we jump into the keynote. So you can connect into our public Wi-Fi if you haven't already, and you can jump onto slido.com for questions, or you can use the QR code that's just to the side. Our online audience can use the conference platform to ask any of your questions. Please remember to validate your ticket for parking. If you do forget, that's fine. We can just call through to security, but we would prefer that you try and get to the front desk before 5 o'clock today. So you can validate it at any time and just hold on to that ticket so that you can get out. If you didn't drive today and you're going to catch the bus to dinner, then I can give you those directions a bit later on in the day. Please make sure that you've signed up for all of your workshops. And if you are in New South Wales, if you're a New South Wales teacher or an ACT teacher and you need to have documentation of your accreditation, we have sign-up sheets also down at our registration help desk, which is down in Gandel Hall. So please go down and make sure you're signing up for those things. It is my pleasure now to welcome Russell Storer to the stage, who is our Head of Curatorial for International Art. Thank you, Russell.
Thank you, and hello and welcome to the National Gallery of Australia. Such an honour to be here with all of you on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country, and I also acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri elders past and present and extend this respect to all First Nations peoples. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our key speaker this morning, Ming Wong. Ming Wong is a Singaporean contemporary artist who works in video, performance, installation and collage. He initially trained in Chinese calligraphy at the Nanyang Academy of Fine Arts in Singapore and then began writing plays for the active local theatre scene. He moved to London to study media arts and received his MFA from the Slade School of Fine Arts, and he now lives and works in Berlin. Ming has a long history with education, having lectured at academies in London, Berlin and Hong Kong, and he is currently a professor in performance in the expanded field at Royal Academy of Art in Stockholm. Ming has become internationally renowned for his video installations that reinterpret iconic films and performances from world cinema, taking on works by directors such as Douglas Sirk, Pasolini, Fassbinder, Wong Kar-wai, P. Ramlee and Roman Polanski, as well as Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. He often miscasts himself in various roles, subverting the presence of the actor and revealing categories such as gender, race, nationality, language, and physicality, amongst others, and will be participating in the upcoming Biennale in Sydney that opens in March. Ming was recently included in Signals, How Video Transformed the World, a major historical survey of video art at the Museum of Modern Art, New York, and he's also been the subject of numerous solo exhibitions around the world, including the Auslan Centre for Contemporary Art in Beijing. Today, we'll talk about his recent artistic research, as well as his experiences with art education around the world. Please join me in welcoming Ming Wong.
Good morning, everybody. I wanted to start off by just saying that when I got an invitation to do this keynote, I accepted partly because I myself have been an educator as part of my practice. After I graduated from the Slade School of Art and was living in London and trying to eke out a living as a struggling artist, one of the routes available to me was to engage in education work, outreach work in London, reaching out to new audiences. And that was how I actually began my professional career when I was in London. It has stayed with me throughout my practice till now. Recently, I've had the opportunity to take on a role as a professor, which is now in the Royal Institute of Art in Stockholm. And constantly, when I look back at what I've been doing, actually last night, as I was preparing for this talk, because I wanted to reframe it as a way to see how I have been engaging with the world as not just as an educator, but as an enabler. I rather prefer the word enabler, which I thought about for a while and earlier during the pandemic, that the role of the artist, I thought for myself, was changing, and being an enabler kind of like encompassed most of the roles, not just an artist, but being somebody who could make things happen with other people, and having the opportunity to share one's knowledge and journeys with those who are just starting out or young, who are younger, basically. There's no better way to say it, for the younger generation. For today's talk, I would like to take you on a journey that I've embarked on since over a decade. And it harks back to my interest in world cinema. And as Russell has explained, I've made a large body of work where I made reenactments of iconic scenes from world cinema, where I often myself have played multiple roles, irrespective of gender, the language spoken, the kind of body that is being inhabited. And to now a broader look at film genres, film history, how that connects to time and place and geography. And there's no better way to start than with Australia, right? So I'm also preparing a piece for the upcoming Sydney Biennale. And for that, I've worked closely with the curators, Cosmin Costinas and Inti Guerrero, to look at a film that was shot in Australia in 1958, 59, in Melbourne. And some of you might know it, younger generations don't seem to know it. So again, part of the work involves sharing information. Like, didn't you know there was this film that was made in Melbourne that really changed the world? Do you know which film I'm talking about? Oh, yes. Right, let's go to On the Beach. On the Beach in 1958 or 9 by Stanley Kramer, based on a novel by Neville Shute, who had just migrated to Australia and had written this post-apocalyptic novel after a global nuclear war where Melbourne was the last point on Earth that was still inhabitable. And what happened was they flew in the likes of Ava Gardner, Fred Astaire, Gregory Peck, Anthony Perkins, to Melbourne in the late 50s and made this remarkable film. I found a clip just to start things off to show some of the scenes that were made in Melbourne. Let's have a look. One more time. There we go.
This is Melbourne on a Sunday afternoon, but the streets are deserted on purpose. This is a city...
Atomic radiation, a dying city, with the last stragglers being cleared from the streets for the filming of Neville Shute's novel, On the Beach. Except for the directors and camera crews and their assistants, Lonsdale Street is bare. And then at the entrance to Queen Victoria Hospital, the extras line up to receive their issue of poison pills. In the film, this is the only alternative to a slow death from radiation. Young star Anthony Perkins has an important role in the film, which is being made by Stanley Kramer with Ava Gardner and Gregory Peck in the leading roles. A story by a world-famous novelist comes to life as Melbourne becomes a giant film stage.
Well, was that the human story that was presented, especially through the story of a young family, a couple and a baby, really affected audiences worldwide, which, according to reports, did affect the opinions of many scientists who decided to kind of band together to make some regulations against the nuclear proliferation. The movie itself, because I'm a film buff, had one of the biggest world global marketing programs and the film opened in multiple cities at the same time, including Moscow, Tokyo, America, all over the world, with huge taglines, which I thought was kind of remarkable. And so for the Sydney Biennial, I made a huge cinema billboard, taking on some of these taglines. I don't know if I should be showing this. Should I be keeping it for the Sydney Biennial? But since I'm a fellow educator and enabler, I think we should look at it, right? So, here we go. So that's me as Ava Gardner and Gregory Peck. And it has little vignettes of the movie with information about it. It's not legible here, but it will be in the full-scale cinema billboard. But the taglines are all taken from the film. You know, it's like this is the last film you'll ever see in your life, or this has to be the. And so I kind of borrowed that kind of language that was used by Hollywood when they were making this film in Melbourne. I would think it's. I didn't know the film before until I spoke with the curators, and if you haven't seen it, I would urge you to see it. It's available online, and I think a great teaching resource because it shows issues which are very pertinent to the day, but through the lens of individuals. So have a look at On the Beach. I'm going to go on to tell you a different story of world cinema. In this case, it's the history of cinema from Hong Kong. And I'm sure all of you know the Hong Kong film industry with Kung Fu flicks from the 70s, etc. But over a decade ago, I started doing research in Hong Kong, which became a kind of personal project to me because my grandparents migrated from South China, from Guangdong to Singapore. I'm a third generation Singaporean Chinese and Cantonese by cultural heritage, although that has been eroding gradually over generations. So my trip to Hong Kong was kind of going back to the source of Cantonese identity, which was epitomized at the time, of course, by Hong Kong popular culture, the films, the Cantopop. And as I did my research, it opened up a whole vista of wonderful stories of migration, survival, resistance, which is still kind of happening today. So for the next, let's see, half an hour, I'm going to go through some of the research and projects that I've done for the past 10 years in order to try and map out some of these stories and share them with you. We will start with what was called Cantonese opera cinema. This is a very unique chapter of world cinema history because what happened was that there was a lot of migration of Southern Chinese to America, to the West Coast particularly of America, to work on panning for gold and building the railroads. Mainly male community of Southern Chinese. And the Cantonese opera troops from Hong Kong, based in Hong Kong, would cross the Pacific by boat and would perform for this community. And during the 20s, 30s, that's where they encountered Hollywood, the cinema. And they brought the art of cinema back to China via Hong Kong, via Cantonese opera. I think this plays. Can I have the volume down? I'm going to speak over this. So, okay. So, I've collected several films as part of my research, and in particular, it features one actor, Yam Kim Fai. And she was famous as a male impersonator. So this was, again, a practice coming from Chinese opera. And being a male impersonator, she played characters that ranged from mythological heroes, gods and goddesses, kings, emperors, prince and princesses, and contemporary roles. Both genders, she was a kind of a time and space traveler within her own body of work. And I am planning to reference her in an opera that I'm currently preparing. As you can see, the films are not just traditional Chinese opera films. A lot of them were shot with contemporary dress and set in modern Hong Kong at the time. And the operas were adapted to speak about issues of the day, even though the form itself was traditional Chinese opera. I'm going to show you one particular example, not from her body of work, but one that I think encompasses some of the innovation that was happening at the time. Let's have a look. So if you don't look at it and listen to it, it would sound exactly like a typical Cantonese opera. But the styling, the trappings, the storing was a kind of pastiche of the British rule in Hong Kong. So the protagonist is a version of Queen Elizabeth II, the late Queen, and very boldly for the time. You have cleavage in traditional Canton Chinese opera on screen. It was largely a commercial enterprise, so it was made to get audiences into the cinema. And you'll hear in a little while, besides traditional tunes, there would be tunes from popular tunes of the day. Just one of many, many examples where It was a melding of East and West technology and tradition that came from this trans-Pacific imagination. Cantonese opera, more than Beijing opera, for example, was able to absorb influences from Hollywood in the form of storylines, musical instruments. The saxophone, even banjo, appeared in Cantonese opera. The films were adapted into Cantonese opera, and so in the daytime they would make films, and in the evenings they would perform on stage, also adapted from the movie. So stage and screen had this wonderful innovative kind of marriage, which has kind of since faded by the 60s. And so during my research, I was asking myself the question if it was possible to try and tap into that spirit of innovation, of trying to kind of like collage these different influences together to talk about issues of the day. The trouble with Cantonese opera at of my time was that it was kind of stuck in a neoclassical form, and most of the audiences were grannies and grandpas, and was finding it hard to find relevance to the younger generation. Let's see. And I just wanted to show this also as some of the icons, some of the heroes that I've discovered during my research. In particular, this actress, Hong Xin-lui, who started off as an actress in Hong Kong, but together with her husband, they were the golden couple of Cantonese opera in Hong Kong, big stars. They were invited to go to mainland China to start up the academy by Chairman Mao and Zhou Enlai, a very noble call to the arts. And I guess out of frustration with the commercial aspect of Hong Kong industry, they went back to mainland China in 1950, in the 50s. But that started a kind of a chapter, a very dark chapter in Chinese opera on the mainland side. Let's share a bit of a story. I say this also because it all would feed into the opera that I'm writing, but also just to kind of find role models, I think is the word, for forms of survival and resistance. Let's have a look. That's the husband. They were the golden couple of Hong Kong Cantonese opera cinema. This is an example of the four runners of Hong Kong film, Hong Kong comedy, if you know Stephen Chow, and this kind of style of comedy. It all really started much earlier on, in the 30s, 40s, 50s. By 1960, they had found themselves across the border back in mainland China, in Guangdong, where they led the Cantonese Opera Academy, where they made really artistic, excellent films for the Chinese film industry, Cantonese opera. And prior to the departure of Hong Kong, the husband wrote a famous opera for his wife, based on the story of Wang Zhaojun, a famous beauty of China who was betrothed to the king of the north, which is modern Mongolia. And the famous aria of departing her home to the unknown future, it's an aria that I've adopted in my work, which you'll see later on. By the 60s, during Cultural Revolution, the husband had passed away. She was left alone to fend for herself. Operas had to have a nationalistic purpose to it. This was already in the early part of the Cultural Revolution, but at the height of it, Chinese opera was banned, forbidden. Actors were persecuted, not allowed to sing, sent to the countryside. Most of them committed suicide. She was sent to work on chicken farms. In order to maintain her practice, she would feed her chickens and practice her high-pitched vocal practice by feeding the chickens. Also during thunderstorms, she would use that moment to practice volume and high-pitch vocal practice, walking around in circles, feeding the chickens to maintain her agility. And when post-cultural revolution, when finally the art form was rehabilitated, including some of the actors who survived, she was the first to be on stage as though nothing had happened. And her first trip out of mainland China, out of being there for several years, was to go back to Hong Kong to see some of her old colleagues who during that time were superstars in the Hong Kong film industry.
火車落車嘅時候，好多香港嘅同行嚟接我嘛。我覺得嗰次我啲眼淚又掂流嘅。喜極而泣。嗰啲係歡喜嘅，又係熱淚啊！但係咧又開心嘅，人民對我個支持力量真係好大。而且對我有個情字啊！梗係啦！我最緊要就係個情，真情係有個真字，有個情字。
She remained the principal of the Cantonese Opera Academy in Guangdong and ran the troupe till her 90s. And part of her practice, of course, was to propagate the art form through teaching, through mentorship. And till today, a lot of the opera singers active in the scene practice her vocal technique, her vocal style, her signature style of singing. And this is just one of many role models that I found during my research that I'll try to incorporate in my work. And then let's have a look again at some of these films from the 70s, early 80s. In my research into Cantonese opera, I looked back earlier in history. So before urbanization in the big cities, the art of Cantonese opera was done via boats in the Pearl River Delta. So most of the big cities were located near bodies of water. And the way the troops traveled were in these junks that were colored red, red boats. Red boat opera was synonymous with Cantonese opera. But this was in the 19th century, second half of 19th century, beginning of 20th century. Opera actors were looked down as like the bottom rung of society. And so were people practicing Kung Fu, Southern Kung Fu, which is so famous these days. Back in the day, they were the bottom rung of society. And they banded together when the Qing government was persecuting, for example, the monks in the temples. Most of them were pugilist monks practicing kung fu, and to take shelter, they banded with their brothers on the boats, on these red boats, traveling freely to different parts of the Pearl River Delta on these boats. So if you think about it, it's a band of fugitives traveling around in a ship on water in this case. But I was already preparing for a story set in the future, right? And most of what we're used to, stories of science fiction, are a band of fugitives in a ship traveling around the universe. And so this was a remarkable kind of like a piece of history that I uncovered. But by the time we reached the 60s, 70s, this is when the Cultural Revolution was at its highest, destroying signifiers of Chinese culture. And I think that gave the impetus to places like Hong Kong, Taiwan, and the rest of the diasporic Chinese communities to try and preserve and promote traditional Chinese culture. That's when the signifiers of martial arts, of Southern Kung Fu, via Bruce Lee, and later Jet Li, Jackie Chan, Sammo Hung, who were all trained in Chinese opera when they were young. It kind of formed the genre of Hong Kong cinema that we all know today. And so by the time we get to the 70s, 80s, some of the stories were borrowed from history. And I just wanted to show you a clip of how these visualizations of that particular aspect of history was used in the films from the 70s and 80s. I'm going to continue to talk over it, so if I could have the volume down. Right, I'll do that. Thank you. So Chinese opera really had a resurgence of respectability and profitability in the 20th century, and celebrated in cinema, but also on stage. This was also the era of popular culture, of technology, when you had recording devices, the gramophone records, the movies really shot the Cantonese opera and the actors to fame. This is the era of the first era of superstars in Cantonese opera and Cantonese opera cinema. And again, one of the distinguishing aspects is gender play. That's part of the tradition of Cantonese opera. Male and female impersonation was very much part of the trajectory of the practice, which appeals to me, for those who know my work. Role-playing, different genders, different timelines, different geographies. Carry on. See the next. Let's see. Next. Coming back to Singapore. So these are some of the photos that I was taking when I was a student in Singapore studying Chinese art. I was enrolled in the Nanyang Academy of Fine Arts in Singapore. I studied Chinese calligraphy, brush painting, seal carving, Chinese art history, a bit of Chinese literature. This was a time when I was when I was in my early 20s, and before I embarked on my MA in London. I took the opportunity to study traditional Chinese art, which was totally unfashionable at the time. There were only 4 of us in the class compared to, 20 doing what was termed Western art at NAFA. But there I learned very much about my own cultural heritage. As part of my research, I visited street opera in Singapore, going backstage, observing life. Also, let's see, that's me in my early 20s backstage. Backstage was a revelation because it was usually families, low-income families who banded together in order to do the practice as a part-time enterprise, mostly for clan religious festivals. This is, of course, slowly disappearing. But when I was a young man, it still existed. It was magic backstage because it was humans rushing around, swearing, sweating, cursing. But once they crossed that magic line on stage, that's when they transformed into a highly stylized art form, embodying the personas of famous heroes, kings, queens, gods and goddesses, mythological heroes from Chinese history and mythology. And so this was the start of my love for the behind the scenes, the making of Chinese opera. Let's see, does this work? Yes. And so while I was taking photographs and making paintings of Cantonese opera backstage, I also started writing for the English language theatre scene in Singapore, except that I was writing in Singlish. Singapore English, which for those who know is basically English words arranged with Chinese grammar, meaning no grammar, and lots of words borrowed from colloquial slang. Telling the story of a young man who was infatuated with Chinese opera, who goes backstage and yeah, that's what happens. But I mentioned this because that's also when I started experimenting with language. Coming from Singapore, no one really speaks a pure English or a pure Mandarin or a pure anything. It really is a kind of a hybrid of forms of expression, where you would hear any combination of different languages in one sentence, especially on the street. This is something I think that kind of had an influence on my later experiments in language, when I would force myself to speak lines in these foreign film clips, where the struggling and the desire to became as important as what the dialogue was about. So I owe it to my formative years working in the theater. And about 2010 onwards, I was traveling regularly to Hong Kong for research. Part of it also included looking at the structures of Cantonese opera. This is kind of like what I call the mothership of traditional Cantonese opera. These bamboo theaters, huge structures that have been a tradition for centuries, and which still continues till today in Hong Kong. Not so much in mainland China because of the rupture during the Cultural Revolution, but it's still practiced till today in Hong Kong. What you saw earlier was the Southeast Asian version. Instead of bamboo, it's maritime wood from Southeast Asia that can withstand the humidity and insects, etc. But this is the mothership in Hong Kong, which at night becomes a glittering spaceship, which gave me the idea to think of the research as a timeline towards the future. A glittering spaceship set against the skyline of Hong Kong. This was over a decade ago, which then led to some experiments. This was, again, using the same materials, fabric, paper, wood, bamboo, to create a design for an installation. That's one of my early forays in combining traditional Chinese opera with thinking about the future. In this case, it's Solaris by Stanisław Lem, the book, and Tarkovsky. I'm going to show you a bit of this clip, which is, again, on the left, you will see Hong Xin Lui, who is the lady who went back to mainland China and who lived up to a ripe old age of 90s, as I mentioned. This is the famous aria that her husband wrote to her on the eve of their departure, leaving Hong Kong back to communist China, to the unknown, based on the story of Wang Zhaojun, the princess betrothed to what they deemed as the barbarian north, the cold barbarian north, a song of departure from her country, from her home, into unknown territory, which I've used as a kind of soundtrack for some of my explorations. Okay, does it go up? No. And so part of this research was, when I was in Hong Kong at the time, of course, things were changing rapidly in Hong Kong. Art Basel arrived, a lot of mega galleries turned up in Hong Kong. There was a lot of excitement about what the future held for Hong Kong, especially in terms of the art scene at the time. The question on everyone's mind was, of course, what's going to happen in the future. that got me to think about, let's look at science fiction. What was science fiction from that part of the world? And I started to research into the history of science fiction in the Chinese-speaking world, Hong Kong, Taiwan, but also in mainland China. A very fascinating journey of rise and fall of a literary genre that followed the trajectory of the political situation in mainland China. Let's see, which then led to a new work. Whoops, go back. Is it going to play? No, let's see, I hope it plays that. It's Windows on the World Part 2, which came from a lecture that I did based on the results of the research in combining these two strands of history. On the one hand, Chinese opera, cinema, on the other hand, science fiction, the history of science fiction. Is it going to play? No. All right. And so that became part of what I was trying to do during those years. How do I find connections between these two timelines? And so for this installation, I put a lot of the things that I uncovered into a bank of screens like ground control space station, which includes news clips of the first and second female astronaut that China sent into space. It has clips from Asian cinema that has a connection to the female space explorer, for one thing. Early science fiction from mainland China, Taiwan. A lot of references to traditional depictions or thinking about the universe, about the cosmos. Partly also present in Chinese opera. You'll see Sandra Bullock in the bottom left corner, who in Gravity had to take the Chinese spaceship from the International Space Station to return to Earth. And there were depictions of how to show the Chineseness of that spaceship, which is in that. Top right, you'll see the first female astronaut from mainland China practicing her Tai Chi in space. Her feet are strapped onto the sides of the spaceship so that she doesn't float away. But that again is a form of martial arts that's connected to traditional practice of Chinese opera, etc., etc. And of course, while this was happening outside. I was observing the changes in Hong Kong society. A youth that was restless and pushing for change. It made me rethink what I wanted to do with my research and project. But it was really kind of a sign of the continued forms of resistance from southern China, from Hong Kong, from the Cantonese community towards the tightening hand of the North, which has happened throughout history against Cantonese opera. There were suppressions against Cantonese opera when it became too popular. Also against Cantonese language cinema when it became too popular when they were operating in Shanghai in the 30s. So waves of pushback from the players in the culture industry, but also in general, as a form of resistance and a protection of one's identity, Cantonese identity, which I myself am trying to reclaim as an artist. Let's see, what else have I got? What is this? Yes. And so a few months later, I did go back to Hong Kong and had the chance to experiment going from page to stage, because so far the research was through academic study. I was studying the form itself, the art form itself, the musical form itself, which of course is really complex and hard to penetrate. But I was able to collaborate through the support of M+ at the time, who had a live art festival. I worked with some younger Cantonese opera practitioners and musicians to try and see if we can translate science fiction script into a performable Cantonese opera. And so Solaris was the base of the script. Can we express this complex story of the subconscious of the protagonist, who returns in the form of his ex-wife who committed suicide, who in the end, of course, even though she is an emanation of the alien presence in Solaris, performs the most human act of sacrifice to the community on the spaceship. Happily, even with classical Chinese sung in Cantonese opera, some of these complex themes were able to be translated. And so with that, I had the confidence to carry on trying to fuse the form of Cantonese opera itself to talk about more complex themes regarding our contemporary situation into the future. I'm going to move on. And coming back to Singapore, during the pandemic, I had an invitation from the Singapore Art Museum to create a public art installation. This was to promote the new premises that they have moved to, which is just in front of the container port terminal in the southern tip of Singapore. And as you know, why Singapore is why we are who we are is because of we got the crossroads of trade routes, and the harbor, of course, is one of the most important factors in our in Singapore's continued survival. And that's where the opera also came from. It came via boat to the harbor, and I wanted to create something that would reflect this history. So the vista of the container port terminal behind the Singapore Art Museum, which is a very seldom seen, which is a site seldom seen by Singaporeans, and which is slowly being decommissioned and moved to the far western end of the island. I thought we should commemorate this moment to see this transition of the commercial port, the 24/7 activity of that is still happening in the center of Singapore. And I decided to build a version of the Wayang stage, which is the Southeast Asian, that is Singapore Malaysian version of the traveling Chinese theater, which hasn't changed that much over the last centuries. As you can see from the top row, it's in the form of a temple which is erected in public spaces for the performance of Chinese operas, particular Chinese operas, as an offering to the spirits. So often they were commissioned by temples, clan associations for religious festivals. And they have been popping up in different places in the city for centuries, unchanged, a witness to all the changes in society. And as we speak, really disappearing. And so with the help of a band of collaborators, we created the Wayang Spaceship. This is a collaboration with an architect, Randy Chan, who is very much involved in local traditional structures and architecture. And through him, we worked with Mr. Lee, who is the last person in Singapore who still knows how to build these stages because he inherited the art form and materials from his late father, who made the son promise to continue the tradition on his deathbed. But Mr. Lee is getting on, and it's getting far too expensive to store some of these antique wood that's used to build the structures. The maritime wood from Southeast Asia, from Indonesia, which you can't find anymore. These woods have a natural property of repelling insects, withstanding humidity, water, etc., and has been used, still being used, in this case still being used, since the 50s. The only things I've changed is the scenography on stage. So instead of the painted boards of dragons and phoenixes and commercials, I abstracted it to light boxes with fluorescent tube lighting, the old magnetic ones that flicker, and layers of dichroic films. These are the films which I'm sure you've seen. They change color depending on where you're standing. When you move it, the colors shift. And by experimenting with it, I made these kind of infinity light boxes to enhance this sense of perspective. And they light up with a rhythm that goes together with the video that's played in the middle, a collage of Cantonese opera films and science fiction films from the same era, mostly Eastern Bloc science fiction films. Let's look at this quickly. So as I stated, Mr. Lee, the last Chinese opera stage builder, here he is, tired, giving up. I'm not paying, so much to keep all his wood. Wants to throw them away. I'm trying to get the museum to find some form of custodianship of the structure itself. He's a contractor. He makes his money by as a builder. This is really his way of paying, remembering his father through his promise by continuing the art form and training his mostly foreign workers from India to assist him in building up these structures which are recyclable, which can be dismantled, brought in a truck to the next site and remounted quickly. Again, Yam Kim Phai, the male impersonator, the scholar warrior, a hybrid role of a warrior and a poet, made famous by male impersonators, time traveling through geographies, time and space and gender. These are all the points of my research which I'm preparing to create a new opera from all this research. I think there's one final slide. And it just moved from the back of the art museum right to the center to right in front of the Victoria Theatre. And we'll be there till March if you happen to be in Singapore in the next 3 months. A different site, but again, set against the colonial architectural background of Singapore. I think that's significant. From another angle, you'll see the skyline of Singapore. A bamboo spaceship that is still present, that's still traveling, that still acts as a kind of portal to the past, but as well as to the future. And this is the trajectory that I'm on as I go into a writing phase in order to create an original libretto. Not pure Cantonese opera, but a hybrid in terms of musical form, but as a story about resistance through the last 2 centuries and to the future. That's where I'd like to end the talk today. We're going to go to Q&A. Please ask me about teaching when we get there, but I leave you with that. Thank you. Now, over to stage left.
So how much time do we have? About 15 minutes, I think. So 10 minutes? Okay. Yeah, so we can choose questions from here. So maybe we can go with the first question. Going back to the beginning of your talk, how does teaching the next generation of artists feed back into your own practice and vice versa? Just that dialogue between your practice and your teaching.
Yes. Yes. I always tell my students that I'm not there to teach them anything. Actually, that's not true, right? We teach in some form, in some way. I'm not there to lecture them. Maybe that's a better way to say it. I'm not there to lecture them on any one theme, but to be a guide based on the fact that I'm just been on this earth for longer than they have, and to try to point out guideposts to them. I think depending on where I'm teaching, I've taught in Hong Kong, I've taught in Germany, and now in Stockholm. Also perhaps to point out guideposts that might not be so readily visible, might not be something that is the first thing that you would notice. That I think that's one of the integral things of my practice. I see myself also, I said before, as an enabler, but another way of looking at it is of being a bridge. I always think of my work as being a bridge for lots of different of things, being a bridge between different perspectives of the world, a bridge of tradition, technology, different sense of identities, perhaps. I think this is linked to my upbringing in Singapore, which has always been a constant navigation of different perspectives in your daily life. So I carry that with me from the days of doing traditional Chinese art in Nanyang Academy to teaching master students in Royal Institute of Art in Sweden. Quite a journey, I think, and it continues.
So that sort of leads to this question, I think. So you work with films and culture of a past time and generation. What do you hope for young audiences engaging with and viewing these works, possibly for the first time?
Well, throughout my my career, I've done a lot of artist talks, of course, and being a visiting artist in lots of different institutions, cultural institutions and educational institutions. And as time progressed, especially with my earlier body of work, where I reinterpret iconic scenes from world cinema, I discovered that fewer and fewer of the younger generation have seen these films or know about our collective cinematic heritage. So I felt compelled, actually, to start showing clips of the original next to my own reinterpretation, just so that the audience can, predominantly younger audience, can see the mechanics of what I was doing, the discrepancies in the identity of the roles, in the language being spoken, in the bodies being inhabited, etc., etc. And it got to a point now where I'm starting to re-edit the older work, where I'm dropping in actually parts of the original clip, like a virus that's infecting the copy, and then it sets up an interesting dialogue. And it's funny for the first few seconds, but then after a while you begin to not begin not to be able to distinguish what is the original, what is authentic, what is the copy, what is the remake, and it kind of fuses. And I found that dynamic interesting. So that's kind of like a new path that I'm taking in trying to re-edit the old work to find some resonance for the new generation who might not have seen the films or don't know what cinema is, or what cinema used to be. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
And how's the history and culture of performing gender in opera or cinema, do you think, has influenced contemporary expressions of gender diversity or acceptance of it in society, from your own perspective?
Well, ever since RuPaul came on the scene with the drag race, I've done a lot less of focusing on the drag aspect of that, because that's everywhere, right? I, of course, I'm trying to look at kind of deeper aspects of role playing, of switching between identities. And it's hard to separate gender from other aspects, from nationality, from class status, from the role you play in your society, etc. It's something that's always in flux, of course, and I think today it's important to set things in context with what's happening in a greater society. I think that's one of the preoccupations of our discussions that I make with the students. Why do you do what you do, and how does it have resonance with your peers, but also perhaps with generations past and future? Being able to extend your vision as well, to extend it as far as you can. Thinking of potential audiences who might not be familiar with your thinking, your perspective. I try to give examples, such as when I first started, I was showing a lot in Europe, and then in the US, Singapore, of course. But I started showing in mainland China from, as I said, from about a decade ago, 2010 onwards. And that was an eye-opener, because I really wasn't sure how the reception was going to be. How do they take this work, right? It's going to be read completely different from in most cases, from how the reading was in Europe and the US. And that was a learning curve, because it was about asking and finding out how people saw the work and responding to that. So in a way, you kind of build your knowledge of the directions you can go with your work, the decisions that you can make with your work, to try to aim for as wide an audience as possible, on the one hand, while keeping true to the particularities, to the specificities of your own perspective, of your research. I think that's a huge challenge, but it's very interesting, I think, to look into.
There's a couple of questions here about politics. I mean, some of your works reference sensitive issues, and if you ever felt pressure to tone it down, your references to culturally difficult histories, and then maybe linking to that, can you give an example of how you teach resistance with your students, or how that can be modelled through art?
Yes. No, it's something that we all struggle with, right? Because the world is moving so quickly. How do we keep up with it? I'm in Berlin, and right now it's really kind of like difficult to move, because it seems like a minefield. I'll give some examples to youth and to students. So, for example, I've been working on this project about the survival of Cantoneseness. In a way, it's a critique to what's happened with me personally in Singapore. It's also what's happening in Hong Kong. How do you make it? Where do you make it? And I can't do it alone. I need to work with collaborators, with actors, musicians, filmmakers. Would I get people into trouble by doing this? And hence I've stopped at various stages of the project. Like, hang on a minute, I can't do it this way. And I've been looking for a solution. And I sounded so confident about writing this libretto and making it, but only because I spent 2 weeks in Vancouver last November with a hunch that it could be possible there. And there I met generations of Hong Kong migrants, right? From the 80s, 90s, and the current wave of Hong Kongers who have left who have arrived. And the conditions of that, I thought, were good, that you had, that potential collaborators had enough of this critical distance from where things are happening, but enough knowledge about it in order to kind of make informed choices. I guess that's also my own position, where I'm from Singapore, which is a kind of a newer nation that takes a lot from everywhere. So I see it as an advantage to be able to pick and mix, right? I'm not what do you call it? I don't have to worship any one particular aspect. All are fair game, which is different from if you come from a particular country with its own heritage where it feels sacred. I don't have that. I think it's just having this distance. I think this is something which can be thought about for students to think about their position in the world, where they stand, and how to navigate from that. I think it's an important aspect of self-knowledge to be an artist.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I think we need to wrap that up. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. And thank you also, Russell, for being here and doing the Q&A for us. Ming, before you go, we have a small gift that we would like to give you, so don't rush off too quickly after this. I just have a few messages before we can move on to the next activity. For our online audience, the next session, you have two options: our Teacher's Voice, which will be projected out of the theatre here, or if you're in the Swiss Lab. You will find the agenda in the tab on the platform. Those who are already registered for the lab will be going into that. Everyone else will be coming into the Teacher's Voice. If you have trouble finding the workshop, please reach out to the digital help desk via the Ask for Help button. Anyone who is not registered for the Swiss Lab, as I said, is welcome to come back in here and join us in the Teacher's Voice session. For our on-site audience, we are going to leave the theatre, and as you leave the theatre, you will see one of our staff members holding a big sign with the name of the workshop that you have registered yourself into. That staff member then will walk you to the location where that workshop will take place. There will be other staff wandering around as well if you need any assistance or you're not quite sure. If you need the bathroom, the closest bathroom to here is just as you go outside the theatre and to the left, or to the right, sorry. We will then have lunch straight after our workshops and meet back here in the theatre for the next keynote at 1:45 Eastern Standard Time for those people who are online coming from somewhere else in the country. Enjoy your workshops. See ya.